All right, so like I said, next up we've got BERNAT AGULLO. He's a former Excel nerd and now Power BI enthusiast, getting deep into DAX, calculation groups, C# scripting, the tabular editor, and governance. He'll be live with a presentation on Power BI field parameters, calculation groups, and dynamic format measures, when, why, and how. And if you're ready, I'll hand over to you now.
All right, hello everyone, and thanks for joining. So yes, indeed, this is going to be my presentation. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and so we can dive in. Oh, I'll present directly from Power BI Desktop so that we can go and see the details on how everything gets put together. So what are these? So calculation groups, field parameters, and dynamic format measures are three features that we have available to build our reports and models. But they may not be quite mainstream yet. So I thought it would be interesting to dive into what they can do and what they cannot, where they are similar and where they are different. Yeah, so we'll dive in these three kids on the block. So field parameters can be built from the desktop as of today. And there are some use cases in which we can also use a calculation group, which as of today, we have to create from an external tool such as Tabular Editor. And then we have something that is like a watered down version of calculation group, which are the dynamic format measures, which we'll see in a minute. These are available inside Power BI Desktop just by selecting the dynamic format string, and then we'll be able to type a DAX expression that will result in the format string that we need to apply to certain data point. But let's start from the beginning. Who are these field parameters and why should we use them? So field parameters. Field parameters can be built from the desktop. When we go to modeling, we have this new parameter, and then we can select fields. Yeah? And here under fields, we can give it a name and select as many columns and or measures as we like. In general, I'd rather have either a column field parameter or a measure field parameter because that helps me build the visuals later. For instance, here in this visual, I'm using two field parameters. I'm using one for the y-axis and one for the x-axis. Meaning that here I'm slicing by brand because brand is selected in the field parameters. But I could just as well slice by category or country. It's always the same chart. There's no bookmarks or anything like that. It's just that this field is connected to this field parameter. Likewise, the value that is being displayed is connected with this field parameter, the measure parameter in this case. And as I have sales amount selected, this is the measure that is being displayed. But I could change that to products, order, margin percent. Notice that the format string of the data labels follows the original format of the measures that I included in this field parameter. Yeah. Field parameters itself are like calculated tables. Yeah. And which we have, first is like, this is a display name, which you can modify if you want to. Then there is something that must stay as it is, which is this name of obscure function, followed by the measure or column, always with the table prefix, which in the case of measures, it looks very bad, but this is how it works. And finally, we have some order. Yeah, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, this will come handy later when we extend this. Yeah, and that will be the same also for our dimension parameter. All right. Field parameters are also very nice because you can select more than one if you want to. So if I slice by country and brand, yeah, now here I could split, and now I have for each country and each brand. And I mean, of course, we need to think of what we do, but this is possible. So it would be the same as having the two fields in the visual. And it will even respect the order in which you enter them. So if you click first, and then the other one is different of doing it the other way around. And for measures, it's exactly the same. So if I select sales amount, I can also select total cost. And in this case, it's a stack bar chart that doesn't make much sense, but I could switch that to a cluster bar chart, and now makes a bit more sense. Okay. So you see that this is quite flexible. This is the basic use of field parameters, and as long as you get this one, this is already very valuable. Now, but this is just one of the kits. So let's talk now about calculation groups. Calculation groups is a completely different beast. Let's see what is this built for. Oh, sorry, wait a minute. Sorry about that. I just remembered I have something that I did to be able to make a presentation easier to follow. So let me just fire this up. Okay. Now we're talking. Okay, calculation. Okay, much better. So you see, in this visual, what do I have? Here, in the values, I have several measures. But for the columns, I have a calculation group column. Yeah. And you see, this is like magic happens, because now I have, for the same measure, I have different flavors of it. I have the flavor of like current value, but also the same period last year value, and then the year over year, and the year over year percent. Yeah, I even have like a label measure that I created that returns sort of a possible label for that calculation, because this is dynamic. So if I select 2018, sorry. Okay, no, I didn't select anything. Now I select 2018, and then you see that all the labels change and all the values change. So this is completely working. All right. And think about this. Not only did I mean, that I didn't have to create so many measures to display this. I didn't type even a single measure for previous year or anything like that. Not only that, but also I get the possibility of showing so many information in such a reduced space. So even if I had all those measures, it's not possible in Power BI to display them by this in this way, such a compact way. So this is a very powerful use case of calculation groups. Okay. And you may ask, okay, Bernat, but how did you build this one? All right, let's have a look. For this, as of today, this might change like tomorrow, because calculation groups on the desktop have already been announced recently, as if they are really about to come to the desktop. So this is how it's been until today. We'll see tomorrow what brings. Here I'm going to use a Tabular Editor 3, but you could also create and edit them with Tabular Editor 2. Yeah, we'll see if this opens. Yeah, it's coming. And now it's going to be connected to this model. Okay. Okay, let me just reset this layout because I'm not sure what happened here. Okay, good. Now, if I have a look here in the time intelligence, which is the column that I was using, you see, let me see if you see it. You probably don't see it. Let me just fire up this. All right. As you see here, this looks like a table, but it's something else. Yeah. This is a calculation group. And you can see that because we have like a small folder here that is called calculation items. And these are each of the rows that are in that table, but they're not really rows. Well, they are rows, but what they do is they override the measures that are in the context, and they can modify them. They can completely override them with something else, or they can just take the original measure and use it in a larger expression, which is what is happening here. If I see here in the calculation items, I have one for each calculation. And of course, current year is very simple. But if I go for previous year, for example, I can see here that here there's like some conditional statements, so that it doesn't really overwrite all the measures, but just some that are listed in a calculated table. And then this is the expression that is used to override the expression. Yeah, the measure. And here you can see that I'm using a function called selected measure, which works as a placeholder for the original measure. Yeah, this is how calculation groups work. Oh, sorry. And so here I basically do a calculate and do the date at -1 year with some small modification. This expression, I didn't think of it. I just copied that from daxpatterns.com, which is slightly more complex than the regular one, which would be calculate selected measure same period last year or something like this. The good thing about this expression is that it takes care of some caveats of not to have like previous year values like in the future, you know, because if I just create the measure and I put it in a chart, then I'll probably get previous year values all through 2024, because I do have previous year values. The thing is that I don't want previous year values in 2024. I just want them to come up all the way to 2023 only, right? And get the values for 2022 and so on. So anyway, this is the expression I'm using here, and this is what it's being used for all the different measures. So there is not a single measure for each of them. So it's just one column, and then I have all my, 7 measures. And you see that once you have quite a few calculations and quite a few measures, calculation groups make a lot of sense. All right. I have done several presentations on calculation groups, so you might also want to check them to go more in detail, because this is the main example that everybody talks about when you get into the topic of calculation groups. But the truth is that they are much more flexible and they allow you to create many interesting use cases. One of them is this one. Look at this. So here I have a second quarter, I have a column for each month. And then I have a total. Here I'm slicing by brand. But now look at this. I have like extra totals. So what's the previous year just for the total, or the year over year, or the average by month. You see, normally this is not quite possible to do in calculation, in standard tables, but by combining calculation groups with a regular matrix visual, for instance, then we can achieve results like this. This and many other use cases, I always talk about them in my blog, which, by the way, I wanted to share with you all. I'm gonna paste that. Well, it's probably in somewhere, but I can just copy them real quick. So in case somebody wants to follow up, and let me find it. Where is it? Okay, let me bring that over here, and I'm sharing it now. Okay, maybe not. Where is it? Yeah, yes, I am. Good, let's continue, because here I have yet one more example, which is something that used to be almost the only way of doing it earlier, which is what they call the dynamic measure calculation group. Yeah, in this case, what we are doing is we have a calculation item for each measure, and then what we do is we override always like a dummy measure. Yeah, you see that it's called dummy. If I look for it here, what is in this measure, you'll see that it's actually just blank. Yeah, you can see that here. But through the calculation group, then we override this blank by an actual measure, and that results in this value. But you see that also the format string is different. So this is also part of the beauty. We didn't discuss, but we also see it here, that calculation groups allow you to modify not just the value, but also the format string of a measure or anything that you're overriding. So actually we get both. So let's have a look. This is much simpler calculation group, so we can just discuss. So if I jump into this dynamic measure calculation group and we check for each of the calculation items, we see that for customers, the code is much simpler. So we just check that we're about to modify one of the measures that we created for that purpose. Say, okay, the selected measure is one of these three, then override it with this measure. Yeah, and very important. And in all the other cases, then just leave whatever was there. So don't break it, just leave whatever was there. So this is very convenient. Okay, but not only that, also we can go into the format string expression, and you see that then this is the format string that is going to be used. And of course, each measure has its own format expression. So this is the format string that is going to be used when the measure is one of these three. When it's not one of these three measures, what happens? It's going to be used this one, the selected measure format string, which is the same as saying it's the same format string that the measure originally had. All right, so don't modify it. That would be another possible way of saying it. So for switching measures, this also was a very popular method. Now with field parameters, we have more options, and we'll see the nuances of using one or the other in a few minutes. So for now, just think that for this specific use case, you can use both. And you might even think that field parameters are a bit easier, but we'll see also shortcomings and advantages of using both approaches. Okay, so now we can jump into the third kit on the block, which is the dynamic format measures. This is a rather different beast because it's actually just a measure, right? So it's not like groups of measures or modifying groups or stuff like this. It's just a measure. Here we can look for it. It's called dynamic format measure. And you see, it's like a good old switch statement. Yeah, so basically what we have is I created a disconnected table called measure names, and I have the names of all the measures. And this is what I'm using for the rows. And then this measure just checks what's the value in that table. And then depending on the value found, it will return each of the measures. This was also a method used in the past. However, this had the shortcoming of what shall we do with the format string? Because maybe some of the measures are percentages and some of them are whole numbers and some of them are currencies. So earlier, before even calculation groups and so on, there was no real good solution because, of course, you could use like a format around your value and put the correct format string each time, but that converted the value into text. And that has implications in case you use that measure inside another expression or stuff like this. So that was not really good. Yet, in this case, you see here, I selected dynamic as my format string. That means when I enable this, then suddenly I have a dropdown here on the left-hand side that allows me to switch between measure and format. So when I go into format, I see that I have already another switch statement, but this time, depending on the value of the disconnected table, I'm setting here different format strings for each of the rows. Yes, and this is the format string that is being used for each data point, which means that now we do have finally a value, a real value for each cell, and also we have the correct format, which is the best of both worlds. Yet then again, as you can see, this is something that lives inside the measure. So, well, it's something which is good and not so good depending on what you want to do. All right, so this is maybe one of the possible use cases. So create like sort of a dynamic format measure, but there is another one which is playing with the data labels. So for instance, here, let's check how I built this one. Here I'm using customers chart measure. Let's look for it. Customers chart. There you go. And you see that the value is exactly the same one as customers. So we're getting the number of different customers who purchase something each month. But as you see, this is also a dynamic measure. So let's have a look at the format string. And we see that here we have some more tags going on. What is this doing is we are first looking for the maximum value of the measure in the visual object. So as you can see, I'm using all selected over date and finding the maximum value aggregated by month. Yeah, and you see that in these expressions, I can also use the selected measure function, which refers to the function, to the measure in which I'm editing. Yeah, so this is, I guess, in case you want to copy format from one measure to the other, you don't have to go and replacing that with the actual measure name. So you can just use this placeholder. Okay, this return to max value, and then the current value, of course, is just selected measure. And then we can see for the format string, they say, okay, if max value equals curl value, that means we are in the maximum value data point. Then what I'm doing here is like just leave the original format string, whatever it is. And otherwise use this triple semicolon format string, which basically hides completely the value. Yeah, we'll see there's other ways of doing it. This is one possibility, and this is what returns. So, and that's how it works. Okay, so if I change the year, I don't know if I'm always getting, oh, no data here. Oh, well, whatever. So it looks like the highest value is always the last one. It could be different one. Okay, great. Let's continue. So that's a question probably most of you are now thinking about. It's like, okay, well, when should I use each one? Okay, so for this value, for this highest value data label thing, we have several options, and some that I even didn't discuss in the previous example. We have seen how to use a dynamic format measure, which I see is a good thing, is that the value and the data label are combined in the same measure, so we don't have extra artifacts going on. Yet now that we look at it, the axis is gone. Yeah, it kind of disappears. Yeah, it's something that happens when you play with the format. Okay, now we could do actually the same thing with our calculation group. Yeah, if we check this, let me just open this real quick. We see that I'm using a calculation group called labels. Let's have a look real quick how this one is built. If I go into the labels one, there it is. You see I have a calculation, there's only max. You see, this is quite straightforward. So the value expression of this calculation item is selected measure, which means don't modify the value. And if I go into the format string expression, I'm using exactly the same format string expression as I was using in the dynamic format measure. All right. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, when I do that, then I can change the measure. Yeah, I don't need a special measure in the chart. I can drop any measure I have, and then I apply the calculation group, the calculation item, and it will work because it's always referring to the selected measure. Yeah. So the data label logic can be applied to different measures, yet the axis is gone. And of course, well, there is the thing about creating a calculation group, which might be relevant for you because it ends up being one more table in the model. And also you might need to train a bit more training on your team when you have to transfer that to somebody else to maintain it. So, but we have more options. Now, there are two that are not related with the main thing, but it's good that we discuss them now, because lately we got something called custom data labels, in which you can just assign a measure to the data labels. Yeah. So if we go to the, what is going on here? I don't see. So here for format, and I select my chart. No, I want just my chart. Now we go. So you go to the data labels and you dive in and you go for values. And here you can apply a different measure. Yeah, this is a customer's chart 2. If I look for this is the second one. You see that here what I do is for the value. So it's a measure that only has value in this data point. So I looked at it and say, okay, if customers, what's the maximum is the current value. Of course, here I have to make reference explicitly to the measure that I want to. I say, okay, if customers has its own maximum value in the visual, then leave that value. Otherwise, just blank it out. And that's what I'm returning. So, of course, for the data labels, then this is blank, 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 until it has a value, which works. The good thing is that now the axis stays, which is really good. At the same time, it might be a bit tricky to understand how is this only displaying this value. So because it's quite hidden, yeah, the fact that we're using custom labels and that there's a measure there and so on. Oh well. But those are all the options. No, we still have one more, which I think is quite interesting, which is basically the same. Yeah, but here, if you look at it, I'm using the same measure that I was using for the data labels, I'm using it as a secondary series, which of course is a series that only has one data point. And then actually it is quite easy to understand what is going on. I have to measure, okay, these are one, this is the other one. And of course I can even like format the data point in a different color or something. So, and I have the access. So you see, each approach has its own things. Oh well, so that's for this maximum data value only. But we have other use cases. Now, this is a dynamic tooltip. Let's look at this one. So this chart, I built it with by month, and then the measure shown is coming from the measure parameter. Yeah. So here you can see if I select just one, look what happens when I go on top. I get the drop down, what they call the breakdown by customer continent. Okay, which is quite nice. If I switch to orders, I see the orders by customer country, customer continent. Okay, and actually, if I select both, I also get both in the tooltip, which is quite nice too, don't you think? All right. How would that work with calculation groups? Can we achieve something similar? And the answer is yes, but a little bit different. So here you see we also get the series names. I can select one. I can select more than one as well. But once I have more than one, look what happens on the tooltip. I get one tooltip for one measure, a different tooltip for the other measure, which might be good or might be not. For this use case, maybe this is a bit more powerful. But if you have like several measures in a matrix with the actuals, and you want a tooltip to show some time intelligence on that measure, to show like the previous year value and year over year and so on, and a little chart and whatever, then probably it's good to have only one measure in the tooltip. So the thing is that when we are using field parameters, it is as if we have two measures in the chart. It's just a way of doing that quicker. And then what happens? Measures are not part of the filter context. Yeah. So they are also in the tooltip, but of course they are the same data point in a way, because we have the same filter context for both. Yeah. While when we are using a calculation group, the calculation group itself creates a different filter context for each of these measures, which are not really measures, but are rather like this dynamic measure calculation group, right? Okay, so to recap, here it's very easy because the measure name is always correct. Here is also correct, but we have to be a bit careful, because if you need to always use the calculation group column so that you get the calculation item name, because the measure itself, it's called dummy. So if you use like a regular table, for instance, then you're going to see this dummy thing on the header, and then you'll have to find a way to hide it or something. If you have a matrix, then you can use the calculation group column as columns, and then it's okay, which is what I'm doing here. Yeah, but this one is quite easy to set up. You just use the calculation, the field parameter in both, and it just works. And here, well, you have to set up the calculation group and then also place it in the tooltip, and well, be a bit more careful. Also, if you have one more measure, well, you have to add it to the calculation group. Of course, you also have to add it to the field parameter, but this is something that you can do directly from Power BI desktop. Okay, what else do we have? So why not both? You could say, can we use field parameters and calculation groups at the same time? Well, the answer is yes. Yeah, but of course we need to choose, because we can either have like a single calculation and more than one measure. So I want to compare sales amount, total cost by current year, or year over year, or I don't know, year to date, whatever. Then we can see what happened with both measures. I can also change that, and I don't know. Of course, there are, if we pick up very different values, then one will look at this, like if it's 0, but also if I just choose one, and then I can also see how this change over years and so on. Okay, so one possibility is single calculation, multiple measures, but I can also go the other way around and select a single measure and then multiple calculations, which might be a bit more powerful, I guess. So if I can go for a sales amount, and then I can see the year to date versus previous year to date, which is the same as a year over year to date, yeah, or year over year to date percent, or current year versus previous year, and see what happens. Okay, of course I can do that over any of these measures. I think this is a pretty powerful visualization. And of course the measure itself, you can choose to do it, in this case, either with a field parameter or a dynamic measure calculation group. In this use case, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but is this all we can do? Well, we can do even crazier things. Now, this one I've been asked twice about it, so maybe it's something that other people have encountered, and maybe it's something that it will become obsolete with all the presentations that have been doing on visual calculations, which are also about to reach Power BI Desktop sometime soon, because they are already publicly announcing them. But for the time being, let's imagine this use case. Yeah, so here I have my dimension parameter, yeah, and also my measure parameter. And they say, okay, Bernat, this is all very good, but I also want to show the percentage on the total of this one, yeah. And you see, for my measure parameter, there is no possibility as show as percentage of the grand total, yeah, cannot do that. So how can I do that? That's the question. Because the definition of this measure changes depending on what we're selecting here and what we're selecting here, because the filter we need to remove is different. Yeah, so here, so orders percentage by brand. This is a measure that I have. Huh? Order percentage. Okay, it looks like my keyboard is about to die. Let me just plug it in real quick before that happens. Okay, good. Now, orders percentage by brand, yeah? So this measure looks like this. So I have orders, I have the total value, which is removing the all selected and product brand, and divide, okay? So I have many measures like this, but how can I synchronize them this way? Because actually now if I select margin, you see I have margin by brand, but here I have, now I change to category, I get margin, but margin by category. How is that even possible? Okay, so this took some effort. So first thing, of course, you saw that in calculation groups, we can refer to the selected measure. So what is the measure that you're using? But there is no generic way, at least in the realm of DAX, to refer to what is the column that you are using for the rows. Yeah, so we need to type those measures. So this is using tabular editor and so on. I managed to create all the combinations of these measures with these dimensions, and therefore creating all the measures. Yes. Then next thing I did was to create a yet another field parameter. And let's look at it. Maybe it's a bit too big. So basically, I selected the measures, and this was what I got. Yeah? So all the text still here for all the 23 measures. Yeah. Oh no, 24. Yeah, because there was a 0 as well. Okay, and as you can see, what I did is adding 2 extra columns to the field parameter. So one is called customers, and the other one is called brand. Sorry, no, they have no name. But for this first row, this is okay. The measure is customers, the dimension is brand. The measure is customer, the dimension is category. So I basically codified that in 2 columns. Yeah. And then the next thing that I did was to create relationship between these field parameters and the other 2 existing field parameters. However, you cannot do that by using the first column of the field parameter, because it's, I don't know, but you cannot, you get an error. And because it has like some special properties. So basically what I had to do is in this measure parameter, I created a calculated column, yeah, which is equal to the first column. Yeah, so the main one, the one that you use for visuals and so on. And just this, so it has the same content. And so if we go to the table view and we select measure parameter, you will see that like this is the same as this, but this one doesn't have these extra fancy properties, so it's just a column with text. Okay. So now the good thing is that I can jump into the model view, and here you can see now I was able to create a relationship between dimension parameter with oh yeah, because it was no, the measure was the first one, so it's value 4, and dimension was the last one, which is value 5. Okay, so this is what happens. So if we check this, for instance, let me check. So for instance, if I do not select any dimension, you see first I get, of course, all the dimensions here, but also I have margin, but you see all the percentage of the margin are all visible, yeah, because I'm selecting them all. But the moment I just select one of them, of course, this is the only one visible. It's the only one that stays in the visual. Okay, and then we have the orders, and well, and then you get why it works, yeah, because when selecting this, I'm also filtering how many of this extra field parameter I'm using. And here I have both. This is the measure parameter, and this is the measure percent parameter. Yeah, so I have all three, and they are related to each other. Okay, but is this the craziest thing that you can do with a field parameter? Well, I'm fortunate to say that no, you can do even crazier things. First, look at it. You see, first we're getting like margin 2019, margin 2018, margin 2018 versus this is beautiful. How can we do that? Because this is not static. If you look at this, and I go for 2018, whoa, I'm getting like current year is 2018, previous year 2017, year-over-year percentage, and it contains even the measure name. So if I change now to orders, I'm getting this also. How was this even possible? I mean, I think quite a few of us wish that we would have like dynamic headers. How in the world is this possible? Well, first of all, this is not something that you can just use right now, because you'll see it has a huge overhead. Let's see what I'm using here. Of course, this is a dimension, yeah. And I can also use brand or anything, yeah. But the thing is, for time intelligence, I'm using this for the measures. I'm using time intelligence measures. What is this? Let's have a look, and we'll see how it was built. Time intelligence. Look at this. Actually, what I did was to create one measure for each combination of all the slicers, and then create a custom label for it. Yeah, which is what we finally see on the header. And then, of course, create extra columns for each of these attributes, so that I can model that and like filter by year, filter by calculation, or filter by measure. Yeah, the slicers come from these columns, and then the headers come from these columns, and then of course the values come from the measures I previously created. Yeah, this is even more difficult than it looks, because you cannot have duplicates in this first column. But of course we have duplicates because, for instance, this could be either the current year if I'm selecting 2018, but it could also be the previous year if I'm selecting 2019. Okay, in order to solve this is not possible to see it here, but this label contains a different number of zero width characters to make this different. And of course, I didn't create that by hand. I created that with a C# script for Tabular editor, which of course is also published in my blog, and it's freely available if you want to play with it. Of course, you see that creating this just to have some dynamic headers, it might be overkill, but it was a challenge that I was willing to do and worked fine for the blog post. Would I go with this to production? Well, probably not. But maybe if you have just a few slicers and you want to do that, you can try it. But maybe then your users will say, yeah, I want that in everywhere. So you might not want to go to that path. All right. So we're heading to the final part of this presentation. So let's discuss just in general what we see for pros and cons of the different three kits. We have pros that field parameters are available as of today in the desktop. You can modify the dimensions that are used in a visual, which is unique to field parameters. You can also change the number of dimensions and measures included in a chart, which is quite unique also to the field parameters. The modeling part is also very relevant. I didn't say that, but you cannot do that with calculation groups. It's not allowed. Performance should not be so bad because you are actually just placing different measures there. You're not modifying measures or anything. And you don't have to worry too much about what happens with the formatting because since you are using the real measure, it has its own formatting. Okay. Yet, shortcomings include that they only work in Power BI reports. So analyze in Excel is out of the question, cannot be used there. You also, if you want to play with the formatting, the conditional formatting, this will not work because for conditional formatting, you must provide a measure. You cannot provide a field parameter. So that's one restriction. And also these extra columns that we saw that we can add to the field parameters, if you use them inside the visual, they don't really work. So you will get all the measures in all categories. So it's only like to filter from outside what will be shown on the inside of the visual. Okay, what about calculation groups? Well, they reduce the need to create multiple measures. They can modify both value and the format string, work in all tabular clients. So it opens up the new possibilities in visuals. At the same time, there is some complexity. Of course, if you also start layering calculation groups, there is something called precedence, and it's not quite easy to understand how it works. As of today, they still require an external tool. And also there is a limitation on composite models, that meaning that you cannot use remote calculation groups on local measures. So if you are using calculation groups in a model that might become the target of a composite model, there is a setting even like to prevent that from happening because it has this danger. Okay. The other way around is okay. You can use a local calculation group with a remote measure, but maybe performance in that case is bad, but for other reasons, because the query you have to send and so on is quite complex. All right. And also just remember that with calculation groups, you can do many things, but they're always on measures. You cannot modify the dimensions by which you slice your data. Okay, finally, dynamic format measures. You see that they are quite a different beast. The good thing is that you don't need extra objects in the model. They have the same capabilities of format string expression of calculation groups. So if you are using calculation groups just for that, maybe you can go around it with some more simple dynamic format measures. But at the same time, they do not reduce the number of measures that you need in your model, and you cannot do anything about the value of the measure. So it's just about the format string. So this is the very, very general. We could probably argue in some of these symbols. If you want to switch dimensions, your only option is field parameters. If you want to switch measures, probably field parameters is the easiest way around, but you can also do stuff with the other two options. Also for the tooltip, I see that field parameters solve pretty good, but in some cases you might be interested in the calculation group. For data labels, then it's either calculation groups or dynamic format measures. To reduce the number of measures, calculation groups are your only option. And to modify conditional formatting, then yeah, you need to modify a measure. So then calculation group is the way to go. Okay. So I'm thinking here, for instance, if you have a measure that is like a color and you want to do something about it, then a calculation group can be a good option. And well, that's pretty much it. Just this one more thing that I wanted to show you is actually a limitation I didn't quite list. Is this not working? Wait a minute. Let me check. Just to show you a limitation on the field parameters when you're doing composite models. Is this going? Yeah. Okay. Field parameters. You cannot use field parameters from a remote model. Okay, when you're doing a composite model. If you are live connected, of course, there is no limitation. You use it because actually it's just like a reporting layer what you're doing. So this is a live connected report, and I'm using here some field parameters and so on. These are the same ones, but at the moment I say, okay, let's enter a local table. This will take some time, but you'll see that suddenly the it will basically break the report because the remote field parameters are no longer usable from the local model. You see? Okay. You see, this is gone. Yeah, so be careful. First, know that this is a thing. So, and before you create a local table in a live connected report, make sure that you're not using field parameters. And if you have to anyway, then the workaround is to recreate the field parameters of the remote model in your local model. Yeah, which is allowed. You can add remote fields and remote measures in your local field parameters, and these ones will work just fine. Okay, this is just something that I wanted to mention as well. And yeah, and that's it. I think I'm about to finish my time, and I wonder if there's any question that should be answered, and at the same time I'm showing this so that you can give feedback on this session.